In the A Song of Ice and Fire series, Daenerys' dragons are birthed from 3 dragon eggs she receives as a wedding gift from Magister Illyrio Mopatis. These eggs are hard as stone and kept as ancient relics, with no expectation of life to stir within them. However, Daenerys feels a call within her to heat the eggs and light candles around them. She becomes pregnant, and as her child grows inside her, she feels more and more bonded to the eggs, treating them with the same dedication as she plans to show her new baby. When she loses Rhaegal in the womb, she brings forth a monstrous stillborn child, scaled with small wings. Daenerys pays for Drogo's life with the life of her child, but her husband remains comatose. She sacrifices his life to maintain his honor and ritualistically burns him on a pyre. She also burns Mirri Maz Duur, the midwife and mage that had treated Drogo's wound and birthed her child. Daenerys walks into the burning pyre, and when the flames burn out, she is crouched amongst the ashes with a miracle: 3 small dragons, the only of their kind in the world. Dragons died out over 100 years prior to Daenerys' birth, along with magic in the known world. The birth of Daenerys' dragons is a miracle, according to George R. R. Martin. The dragon eggs she had been given had hardened into stone, but through ancient ancestral knowledge deep in Daenerys' blood, she was able to bring magic back into the world and fulfill her family's prophecy of being the savior of the Long Night. But before all of that, we have to wonder, where did Daenerys' dragon eggs come from? Who is the true mother of dragons when it comes to the dragon lineage of Viserion, Rhaegal, and Drogon? In episode 8 of House of the Dragon, Daemon goes spelunking in the dark caves of Dragonstone in search of a freshly laid clutch of eggs by Cyrax. He discovers a hardened black mass which incubates 3 eggs within. The black mass of afterbirth protects the precious dragon eggs inside, and Daemon is thrilled to tell the dragon keepers of his discovery. We later learn in episode 10 that Daemon has a total of 12 dragon eggs incubating on the Dragonmont under the watchful eyes of the dragon keepers. About half of dragon eggs do not hatch, but simply petrify into beautiful scaled stones that are increasingly rare over time, even scarce by the time we reach Daenerys' storyline. Dany had never even seen a dragon's egg before. So it seems the obvious answer is that Cyrax laid these 3 eggs, and those are the eggs that make their way to Daenerys 170 years later. But doesn't that seem a bit too easy? Well, the answer is yes, because book readers will know that there was another set of 3 eggs that once went missing from Dragonstone. The old King Jaehaerys had an older sister, Rhaena, who rode the dragon Dreamfire. Dreamfire was also a very fertile dragon who laid at least 3 clutches of eggs during Rhaena's lifetime. Now, Rhaena had a very tumultuous life. She was married 3 times. She had twin daughters, one of whom was the infamous Arya Targaryen, and Rhaena was pretty obviously into women. She fell in love with the sister of one of her husbands, Alyssa Farman. Alyssa was a very exciting woman who loved sailing. She had her own boat and had made many voyages starting as young as 14 years old. She and Rhaena traveled together by ship and on dragonback, and Alyssa saw firsthand how the lords coveted those dragon eggs. After many lords and ladies tried to convince Rhaena to sell or even give a dragon egg to them, she asked her brother Jaehaerys to find her a place of her own. She moved to Dragonstone with her entourage, which included Alyssa and her brother Andro, who was Rhaena's husband. According to Fire and Blood, at this time, in the Great Citadel under the shadow of the Dragonmont, more dragons were being born every time the moon turned, or so it seemed. And this was largely due to Dreamfire. Alyssa hated it on Dragonstone, and she longed to sail into the west to explore the Sunset Sea as no one had ever done before. She asked Rhaena to build her a ship for this adventure, but Rhaena refused. But this only created resentment between them, and when she asked Rhaena a second time if she could leave the island, Rhaena finally allowed it. What Alyssa did next may have changed the shape of history. Upon her departure, Alyssa discreetly stole 3 dragon eggs from Dragonstone. She then sailed to Braavos, where she sold the eggs to the Sea Lord of Braavos for an exorbitant price. She had a large ship commissioned with the profits, which she called the Sun Chaser. Alyssa sailed into the west under the false name of Alice Westhill and discovered 3 islands, which she named Aegon, Visenya, and Rhaenys, after the conqueror. When Rhaena found out about the eggs, she and Jaehaerys nearly started a war with Braavos. King Jaehaerys sent Septon Barth to negotiate their return, but the Sea Lord denied having the eggs. Braavos did generously wipe away King's Landing's debts, but Jaehaerys promised if any chickens hatched from those eggs, Braavos would burn for it. Vermithor and Dreamfire were larger than any hatchling that might come from those eggs, and it was hoped they would harden to stone away from the heat of Dragonstone. For readers of Fire and Blood, this created the idea that the 3 eggs sold to Braavos were the same eggs that were later gifted to Daenerys Targaryen. But by House of the Dragon including the scene of Cyrax's clutch of 3 eggs, it creates conflict in the commonly believed source of Dany's eggs. Show watchers may not be aware of another possible source of Dany's eggs, so we must explore this idea further. So which dragon was it? Who laid Daenerys' eggs? Dreamfire or Cyrax? Dreamfire is the dragon of Helaena Targaryen during the Dance of the Dragons. Helaena claimed her when she was around 11 years old, and like her other creepy critters, Helaena is very well bonded to Dreamfire. Helena's children, Jaehaerys and Jaehaera, also have their own dragon hatchlings, Shrikos and Morgul, who live in the dragon pit. It is unknown whose eggs they come from. However, considering there is no report of Dreamfire laying any more eggs after Alyssa stealing the eggs from Dragonstone in 54 AC, we must question if the eggs may have been laid by another dragon. I say this because at a time when dragons were living and there were professional dragon tamers dedicated to the craft of breeding dragons, there is likely a shelf life on eggs when deciding if they were viable or not. When it is common knowledge that half of dragon eggs don't hatch at all, we have to assume the breeders themselves would have a point in which they decide whether the egg will hatch into a dragon or not at all. The time between Dreamfire's last known clutch in 54 AC and the births of Shrikos and Morgul around 120 AC is nearly 70 years. However, this is my own assumption and could be completely wrong. Daenerys' dragon eggs obviously hatched after over 100 years, but again, hers were a miracle and not the common breeding habits at the time of the Dance of the Dragons. Cyrax was only ever ridden by Rhaenyra Targaryen. She laid several clutches of eggs throughout her lifetime, particularly while she was spending a lot of time with Caraxes and Vhagar. While Daemon and Laena Velaryon were married, Rhaenyra spent a lot of time with them. The 3 would fly their dragons back and forth between Dragonstone and Driftmark, dancing through the skies. During that time, Cyrax was very fertile, so it seems very likely her eggs hatched into the dragons Shrikos and Morgul. Rhaenyra even offers the eggs of Cyrax's next clutch to Alicent and her children in episode 6 in an attempt to make peace. Viserys recognizes the generosity of this gift, though Alicent declines. Interestingly, we should reflect on the fact that none of Alicent's children received dragon eggs, but rather they all claim grown dragons. Even Aegon's dragon Sunfire is claimed when Aegon is older, though he had not had another rider, like Aemond and Helena's dragons. Meanwhile, it is implied that Rhaenyra's children and Daemon's daughters are all given eggs laid by Cyrax. We will see later in the story that Rhaena's egg finally hatches into a dragon called Morning, who survives the Dance of the Dragons. It is said that Cyrax's final clutch is laid right before the Dance of the Dragons starts, presumably the same eggs that Daemon finds in episode 8. So, while it is not confirmed, we can assume that the 12 eggs that Daemon has incubating were all laid by Cyrax. Interestingly, in this conflict, we can see another layer of the greens versus the blacks. Helena's dragon Dreamfire is for Team Green, while Rhaenyra and Cyrax represent Team Black. So we can find that the effects of the Dance of the Dragon even stretch to Daenerys' dragons and their lineage. Both Dreamfire and Cyrax are queens in their own right, and both have connections to the idea of the mother of dragons, so it makes it even more difficult to narrow down this mystery. We're going to get into spoiler territory now, including information from Fire and Blood and the A Song of Ice and Fire series, so prepare yourselves. Along with so many other dragons, both Dreamfire and Cyrax are killed during the dying of the dragons. When we think about the fact that Rhaenyra and Helaena are sisters, it makes their dragons' deaths even more heartbreaking. Dreamfire is killed within the dragon pit, while Cyrax is killed outside of it. There is a lot of imagery of the original dragon mythos of George R. R. Martin's world here in this scene. If we recall the myth of the dragons bursting forth from the moon, the idea of Dreamfire flying into the dome of the dragon pit, crashing into the stone ceiling and crumbling it to bits, destroying the last dragons inside, it's almost an inversion of this dragon myth. The birth of dragons versus the death of dragons. Meanwhile, Cyrax, who is the last dragon named for a goddess of old Valyria, flies alone to Rhaenys' hill and fights to her death outside the walls of the dragon pit. There's a lot of mystery surrounding the actual death of Cyrax, but we do know she chose not to Dracarys the people attacking the dragon pit, and rather fought tooth and claw, devouring many in the mob. Why she chose not to burn the people when she could have survived the fight in doing so is unclear. But if we believe there is an emotional connection between dragon and rider, we must imagine the heartache Rhaenyra felt as she watched the dragon pit being destroyed and the Hill of Rhaenys burning. In the story of Alyssa Farman stealing 3 eggs, the reader can connect the dots and track Dreamfire's eggs making their way to Essos and one step closer to Illyrio Mopatis. Illyrio is a magister of Pentos. While the details of the paper trail between the Sea Lord's palace and the hands of Illyrio are unclear, there is a motive in Illyrio acquiring the eggs for himself. Illyrio had 2 wives, one a princess of Pentos, who died, and a second wife that he loved very much named Sarah. Sarah was a pillow houseworker, but she was also so much more. She had large blue eyes and silver blonde hair, and there's a pretty widely accepted theory that Sarah may be a Blackfyre or Targaryen descendant. Now, Illyrio has his fingers in many pots and plots and is besties with Varys, of all people. If Sarah is a Blackfyre descendant, this could be the reason why Illyrio sought out the dragon eggs. He may have simply wanted to gift his wife with beautiful and rare dragon relics, or he may have had bigger plans in mind. But we may never know for sure. Sarah died unexpectedly by contracting the Grey Plague during an outbreak in Pentos. From a Braavosi galley, mind you. We do not have the dates of this Grey Plague outbreak. Daenerys and Viserys bounced around throughout their childhood. They travel from one lord's manse to another, Viserys vainly trying to gather support for his claim on the Iron Throne, even staying with the Sea Lord of Braavos for a time. Daenerys questions why Illyrio takes her and her brother into his manse, showering them with finery and asking for nothing in return. Perhaps it was just the opportunity to try and wake the dragon from the old stone eggs, to see if either Daenerys or Viserys carried a special attribute that would bring forth magic. He chose wisely in gifting the eggs to Daenerys, who held the ancient wisdom deep inside her. Yet, Illyrio tells Daenerys where her eggs come from. "Dragon's eggs, from the Shadowlands beyond Asshai," said Magister Illyrio. "The eons have turned them to stone, yet still they burn bright with beauty." So here we face another crux of the issue. Did Illyrio actually visit the Black Lands of Asshai to retrieve these dragon eggs? Interestingly, the Asshai believed that dragons originate in their lands and that they shared the knowledge of dragon binding with the Valyrians. So we see a nod to yet another dragon creation myth within Illyrio's statement. It seems very unlikely that the eggs actually came from Asshai themselves, but it certainly makes it all sound much more dramatic to a young Targaryen girl who had never even seen dragon's eggs before. If Illyrio truly has a plan to wake the dragons through Daenerys, he would likely be aware that one cannot simply throw any old dragon egg at any old Valyrian and expect their blood to be bonded to that particular dragon lineage. The Targaryens have their own distinct dragons linked to their family, while other Valyrian houses have their own dragons linked to their own bloodlines. This is the reasoning for marrying within the family, to preserve the bloodlines which are inherently linked to their familial dragons. Blood of the dragon. This does not seem to be secret knowledge, and I want to point out that in House of the Dragon, while living in Pentos, Daemon found ancient Valyrian texts about dragon riders and old Valyria that he spent hours poring over. In this, he gained the secret knowledge of dragon binding. Considering Illyrio is a magister of Pentos, and he was married to a secret Blackfyre descendant, and he raised and funded young Griff's endeavors, and he helped elevate Daenerys and gifted her dragon eggs, I think it's safe to assume he might have read some of the same books. But coming back around, this only explains the trail of Dreamfire's eggs making their way to Braavos. And while there is a treaty between Pentos and Braavos against slavery, and we might assume Illyrio had his hand in making the arrangements of this treaty as Magister of Pentos, it might be there where he acquires the 3 eggs. Of the 12 eggs that Daemon reports in episode 10, 3 eggs are sent to the Vale with his daughter Rhaena. After the fall of Dragonstone, Aegon II sends for fresh eggs to be sent to King's Landing so he can try and claim a new dragon after Sunfire's death. According to Fire and Blood, ravens were sent to Dragonstone, where the eggs of the Targaryen dragons, some so old they had turned to stone, were kept under guard in under vaults and cellars. The maester there chose 7, in honor of the gods, that he deemed most promising and sent them to King's Landing. King Aegon kept them in his own chambers, but none yielded a dragon. This leaves 2 eggs unaccounted for back on Dragonstone. By the way, I'd love to know who the new maester is, who is so well educated on dragon rearing. I seriously doubt the former dragon keepers were honoring the faith of the 7 over the gods of old Valyria. So with the information that we currently have, it seems like the eggs of the Targaryens in Westeros are kept too keenly under lock and key to be easily stolen. Even after the fall of Dragonstone, the eggs are reportedly kept under guard. By sending a new maester to Dragonstone, it shows that protecting the island fortress is actually a very high priority, especially after the dragon pit has been destroyed. One of the first things that Aegon II does is order the dragon pit to be rebuilt, so having a dedicated place to house their dragons is very important to the Targaryen kings. After the Dance of the Dragons, there are simply too few dragons to not keep a close eye on every aspect of their lives and lineage. Only 4 dragons survive the Dance of the Dragons, and they either hide themselves away from the eyes of men or are kept closely monitored by their rider. Even when there were more dragons in the world during King Jaehaerys' reign, we'd see how destabilizing it could be if dragon eggs were acquired by someone else. Jaehaerys and Rhaena were ready to go to war after Alyssa stole Dreamfire's eggs. Those eggs we can clearly track making their way to Essos, and how they could have made their way from the Sea Lord's palace to the hands of Illyrio Mopatis, and his motives for acquiring these ancient relics. Granted, we may still learn more information in the next part of Fire and Blood, such as the last dragon, who, according to Sir Arlen of Pennytree, laid a clutch of 5 eggs, though none hatched. There are still dragons roaming the wild, like Silverwing out on Red Lake, or Nettles and Sheepstealer out in the mountains of the moon. We don't know if any new eggs might turn up. It seems as though the 7 eggs that Aegon II called back to King's Landing might just be the only eggs that the future Targaryens have to work with and try to hatch, either by placing them in the cradle of their babies, or by a massive fire ritual at Summerhall that called for 7 eggs. There is still so much more to learn, but with the information that we have available at this time, it seems like the eggs that Alyssa Farman stole from Rhaena Targaryen and her dragon Dreamfire are ultimately the 3 eggs that end up in the hands of Daenerys Stormborn and hatch into Drogon, Viserion, and Rhaegal. We can track the whereabouts of these eggs for the most part, and after this occurrence, the Targaryens become even more protective of their eggs. While we do not know if they were guarding the eggs prior to Alyssa stealing them, we know that they are under guard now, and even more so after the destruction of the dragon pit. After the Dance of the Dragons, it would simply be too difficult and risky for anyone to try and steal an egg. So until we get more information in the next part of Fire and Blood, it's safe to assume that Dreamfire's eggs are in fact the eggs that become Dany's dragons and return magic to the world. And just for some further fun, Corlys Velaryon believes he saw the Sun Chaser, Alyssa's ship, in Asshai when he was there on one of his famous voyages. In Asshai, they trained Shadowbinders and Blood Mages, and interestingly, you might recall a certain Shadowbinder who crosses paths with Daenerys in A Clash of Kings. Quaithe from the Shadow, who hides her face beneath a Shadowbinder's mask, but knows the danger her dragons will pose to Daenerys herself. The Shadowbinders of Asshai work shadows to do their dark bidding, like we saw with Melisandre. Interestingly, Melisandre wore a ruby choker to keep her appearance youthful and beautiful, though she was hundreds of years old. Quaithe wears a mask of the same geometric shapes, and we must wonder what appearance she might be hiding. Could it be that Quaithe is Alyssa Farman, and she made her way to Asshai, as Corlys reported? Did she pick up the dark arts and learn shadowbinding, and, like Melisandre, hides her age behind her Shadowbinder's mask? When Quaithe speaks to Daenerys, she gives sincere advice, as though she remembers Rhaena, and when the High Lords would try to weasel an egg from her. Daenerys sees tears in Quaithe's eyes, recalling the massive guilt she felt for betraying Rhaena all those years ago. But what do you all think? Do you believe Daenerys' dragons hatched from Dreamfire's eggs, stolen by Alyssa Farman and sold to the Sea Lord of Braavos? Or do you believe that they are the clutch of 3 eggs laid by Cyrax in the warm caves of Dragonstone? Or are we missing information that only Fire and Blood Part 2 can provide? One of the very few times we see Daemon truly happy is after he finds the 3 eggs Cyrax has laid and brings them to the Dragon Keepers for incubation. He is sincerely happy to find these precious eggs, and the fact that he takes such care to protect the Targaryen dragon lineage is so impressive of our rogue king. One can only imagine Daemon keeps a very tidy and temperature-controlled dragon incubating undervault. With the care and dedication he shows to the eggs he collects, it would be very difficult to steal an egg under his watch. Dreamfire and Cyrax and the tiny last dragon are the only dragons reported to lay eggs during the entire Targaryen reign. These eggs are all well accounted for and tended to, other than the 3 eggs which were stolen. Those 3 are the only eggs that could have found their way to Daenerys to become her dragons. Let me know your thoughts and questions in the comments below, and be sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring that notification bell for all the latest videos on House of the Dragon and much more. And consider joining my Patreon or channel memberships to help support the channel and gain exclusive benefits, all linked below. Thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye!